Welcome, I'm Paul Bishop, and this is another episode of Running with the Pack, featuring interviews with Wolfpack Publishing's best-selling authors. With me today are Rebecca Forster and Lois Brown, whose thriller and adventure novels are now appearing under the Wolfpack brand. Lois is a former Washington, D.C. news correspondent who, after exploring a cave in Utah, believed once to have held Montezuma's Aztec treasure, became fascinated with the legends and mysteries of the Southwest, and sharing the finding of this possibility with her readers led to her being asked to participate in two different television shows on the History Channel and elsewhere, which has led her to her Legends of Treasure series, which is now being published by Wolfpack. The early books in the series will be released during the course of next year, and starting with the currently available prequel novel, Moth to Flame. So, her long anticipated fourth book in the series, Haunted by Lies, will be appearing early next year. Rebecca Forster claims she will try anything once, but when she was dared to write a book, she found her passion. Proving that she will do anything 39 times, she has now written 39 books, including books that have been on the USA Today and Amazon bestseller lists. And she's now joined forces with Wolfpack Publishing, starting with her Finn O'Brien series and a number of her standalone legal thrillers. And those will be being released again, starting at the end of this year and through the beginning of next year, with a new Finn O'Brien novel, Intimate Relations, released in early 2021. Welcome, gang. It's great to see you. It's great to get some human interaction during this time when we don't actually get to talk and see one another. So welcome, and it's nice to actually get to know both of you and see both of you. I've met you both several months ago, and we've had some interaction, and it's been wonderful, except for Rebecca's husband, who decided to give me the third degree when I called the house. Who are you? Why are you calling my wife? What's going on here?
Well, you have to remember, I get fan mail from prison sometimes, so he's just not quite sure about all that.
So it's the blessing of having a superior court judge for a husband, isn't it?
That is true. Third degree always.
So, tell me, Lois, how do you go from having an interest in mysteries and legends of the Southwest to actually being on television and then writing a series of books about it? I'm sure there wasn't a clear path to that.
No, I think it was just, I don't know what's the word, serendipity, or just kind of one thing led to another. But it was a lot of fun. So it all kind of started when I was single, 20 years old. I lived in Europe, and my roommate there got a letter from home. This was back in the olden days, all right, paper letter. And she was laughing, reading this letter from home, and I asked her what was so funny, and she said that her uncle, who was quite a character, that he had bought this property in a place called Kanab, Utah, and there were some geese on the land that were like there were some snails on the land that were protected, a protected species, and some geese got brought in and they were eating the snails, and it was this big court case. And I remember thinking, oh, that's interesting. Then she told me about a haunted lake on the land and her brother's experience going down and scuba diving in this haunted lake, and that he felt someone tear his mouthpiece out, but there was no one else by him. He felt people grabbing him when he was in this lake. So it was a really fascinating story. Just put it in the back of my mind. Returned back to the United States, was doing a master's degree, met a cute guy, and was kind of surprised when he told me he was from this tiny town, Kanab, Utah. And I immediately remembered that story from when I was younger and how this crazy uncle of my friend had lived there. Anyway, we ended up getting married, and I was so excited. We did a reception in Kanab, and I kept bugging my husband because he knew this uncle. And I kept bugging my husband, hey, you got to tell me when this guy comes in. And I got to meet him, and he was a very fun character. And he had bought this land purposely because of the legends and the lore and the myth around it. He was going to build a house there. It never did materialize, but that started my love of the area. And honestly, I always loved legends and myths. That really started when I was very small. But I wrote a couple short stories about that area, about Kanab. I fictionalized them, but based them on some real legends and also real places. And then a couple TV producers were looking for more information about the area and happened to stumble on my short stories, contacted me and met me down in Kanab, and went from there.
Wow. Okay. I mean, like you said, serendipity, but driven by your interest. And I think that's one of the things I want to talk about a little bit today, is what drives us to create and those types of situations that we turn to our own creative advantage. Now, Rebecca, you're basically known for your legal thrillers.
Correct.
And what would be your background to get into that? You don't really do legal thrillers unless you know what you're doing, because it's hard to compete otherwise.
It's very hard to compete. And actually, I had a hard time selling my first legal thrillers because I wasn't a lawyer. In fact, I get that question all the time, you know, what makes you think you can write them if you have no legal background? And actually, my background is in business. So when I married my husband, I love all these husband stories, but my husband and I got married the day after his last test in law school. And after that, he was hired by the U.S. Attorney's Office, and he ended up specializing in organized crime and terrorism prosecutions. And I had always loved thrillers and mysteries and things like that, never really did traditional girl reads. And so when he started doing that, just, you know, by osmosis, I was drawn into the web of FBI, DEA, you know, his prosecutions. So I was court watching, I was doing a lot of things and never really thinking about it. But I think by osmosis, I understood certain things about how the justice system worked. So when I started writing legal thrillers, by that time, he had gone through the U.S. Attorney's Office. He was a Superior Court judge, and then he was presiding judge of the Los Angeles courts, which is the largest court system in the world. And I was so intrigued. I found out I was just a legal voyeur. I loved watching court. I loved learning about the system. And I started reading legal newspapers. And luckily, I have a really good group of people who are willing to walk me through the process. So when I get to a procedural aspect of my books, then I have, expertise I can draw on. And when I moved into the Finn O'Brien series, so I have I do a lot of legal thrillers, but I moved into police procedurals. I started doing things like going to the ATF and DEA Citizens Academies, which are 8-week courses, about what they do. So I'm trying to do a deep dive. Every time I want to write something and I don't have that expertise, I find a way to insert myself into the area I want to learn about. And research is one thing that I absolutely adore. So this is no hardship at all to hang out at the courts or to, go out on a shoot with or ride along with cops. I love that stuff. And I've been writing for 35 years. So I've done a lot of it and really enjoy it. So if they would take me, I would join, but nobody's going to take me. Too old now.
With research being so fascinating, and I find it the same thing, it's sometimes difficult not to do too much research dumping in the books.
Yeah.
So when you're writing a legal thriller and you're putting in this stuff, do you ever go back and take some of it out to keep the story moving?
Absolutely. I take a lot out, and I also don't put in everything because as you well know, if you've ever sat through a trial, it's very boring. Sorry, go talk to Lois.
No worries. Talk to Lois, okay. But it's the same thing. You've got to do quite a bit of research for the Legends of Treasure series. And again, when you're doing that, I would imagine that more and more rabbit holes are appearing that you can go down of other myths and legends and connected things. How do you stay focused on the story that you're writing?
That is such a great question. I don't know if you're familiar with the podcast Lore or not.
Yes.
I noticed that they have the same temptation, right? You go back, and especially when you start to do history, you'll find that the history in one town has this particular myth or legend, and then it's connected to the neighboring town. And oh yeah, then there was this murder, and they're almost connected, but not quite. And I really do have to pull back. I have to just try to pretend that I'm the reader, and how much of a good story is going to be good, and then how much is going to start to confuse me. And I love to base my books on, well, I'm a reporter. And so I always use real news reports about either similar or actual events in my books. And that can also be tricky. Like, I can inundate the reader with a bit too many facts. So I have to pull back. So I pulled back in the sense that I just started doing very short little news or media clips at the very beginning of the chapter that related to the story, instead of trying to put way too much in. So yeah, information is awesome, but especially when you write fiction, you just have to be careful. You don't lose the fun story with too much information.
And I think using the epigraphs at the beginning of the chapters, like you do, epigraphs are actually considered old-fashioned, but I've used them because when I write my books about lie catchers, I start each chapter off with a epigraph about truth from somewhere, a different perspective. And I've had more comments on those than I ever would imagined I've gotten. People really like them, and I'm thinking, okay, then why is this old-fashioned?
I was just going to say, I didn't know they were old-fashioned.
I didn't
Could you explain that? That's interesting.
It goes through phases. Like prologues are supposed to be old-fashioned now. You're still writing a prologue. You're just calling it chapter 1. So it's
totally true.
It's a bizarre circle of things. And I think your epigraphs in particular serve a purpose of planting the readers directly in the path of the story that you're trying to tell, which I think is very useful for them.
Yeah. I'd like to go back a little bit, though, about research and using too much. The one thing I always have to remind myself of is that what the reader is really engaged with is the character you've drawn. And if the research and the fun of showing what you know overwhelms the characterization, then I realize, oops, that's a problem. It's got to be seamless in how they dovetail.
You don't want that author intrusion.
Exactly.
Which you can sometimes get. And I will go through and trying to read my own stuff, and I'll go, well, I've just gone, half a dozen paragraphs without moving the story along.
Yeah.
All I've done is dump info. So that's got to come out.
Yep.
And I think that's one of the hardest things for beginning authors to learn, is what to take out.
Yes.
What isn't necessary. Because we love this stuff. We're interested in this stuff. So why isn't everybody else? No, you got to move your story along. Now, the difference between, I think, Lois's books and Rebecca's books is, Lois, you have the ability to have a touch of the supernatural in there.
Yeah.
Rebecca, you really can't deal with that.
No, I don't have a touch of, it's funny, I was thinking about that this morning because somebody brought this up. I have a touch of the action adventure, and it's still realistic, but the books are becoming more physical the more I do, which is interesting. But I love the fantasy elements of Lois's. I've always wanted to do something that combines fantasy and the law. Would be really cool, but that's way on the back burner.
With the legal thrillers, how do you stay up with current law and current situations?
Well, Lois too, having been a journalist, you probably still read everything. I mean, I read the legal newspapers, I read the Wall Street Journal and New York Times, and I'm constantly reading, constantly listening to the news, constantly trying to get my husband to tell me what he's been doing, but he doesn't like to do that. So, I just keep my ears open. And a lot of times it's the tiny little things you'll find in a newspaper, not the big headline grabbers, because I figure there are other people who are going to do the big headline grabbers. And I want to do something that is really unique. So a lot of times I'll read and research politics and the legal system. So for instance, one of my books started out with a curiosity about MK Ultra experiments in the 50s and how it's appropriate today and what the legal ramifications were. So I just like to pick up on little things, but I am always reading just whatever I can get my hands on.
If I can jump in here, Rebecca, I love the fact that you write legal thrillers. I love your kind of genre, well, not genre bending, but you're breaking the assumption that that genre is for men writers.
Yes, and men lawyers, and
Yeah.
that's the cool thing. And it was very difficult early on because and I hate to admit it, I rode my husband's coattails. I had to say, you know what? I'm not a lawyer, but I sleep with one. How's that? So I figured, that was my only credential, even though I could have proven on my own that I do the research, but it was hard because it was Thoreau, it was Grisham, it was all these people. And so, so
it's fun that you're putting more action adventure in there. I don't know what your experience has been, but when I started writing, I assumed incorrectly that I couldn't write a fight scene because I've never fought someone,
right.
And come to find out, I love writing action scenes. I get on YouTube and I watch karate people. I watch, like self-defense videos, all those sorts of things. I ended up loving my action scenes are some of my favorite. I'd have wondered how you were. Is that kind of what happened?
We're going to be new BFFs. That's all there is to it. But actually, it was when I really started going to the citizens academies. The first thing I did was I got invited to go and visit the USS Nimitz for 2 days. And so I was on an aircraft carrier and I landed by tailhook. And I was just like overwhelmed with the excitement of this whole thing because I'd never really been challenged physically. And I mean, you go to tennis, you do that stuff. But to be put in a situation where you're thinking, oh my gosh, a little hook is going to stop this plane. That was amazing. So that was many years ago. And since then, when I heard about the academies, started understanding firearms, all this stuff, I realized not only what a thrill, but what a responsibility these guys have. And so, it just, I don't know, it started creeping into my books the same way that weirdness with the lake and, all that stuff kind of crept into your head. And so suddenly here was this aspect that just took on a life of its own about the physicality of these characters. And my son calls it my characters hulking out. It's like, at a moment they just become what they are. But I think it adds a really good element to this because it's not all cerebral. So I can't wait to read yours. I can't wait to see what kind of fights people get into.
Well, I'm the same way. I'm excited. Legal thrillers are one of my favorites, so it'll be fun.
2 new fans right here, Paul, for each other.
I like it. That's the whole point of bringing everybody together. I knew this would happen. Now, I keep, we're talking about reading and researching, and I keep basically what I call my writer's treasure chest. And it's really just a notebook or many notebooks at this point where I will keep incidents or little pieces of story or something that jumps out at me, and I put it all in there. And then when I go to start a new book, I will go through that journal, that treasure chest, and kind of pull out 2 or 3 things that I seem to fit together in that moment. I had learned about synesthesia 15 years ago. And basically this is people who see words and as opposed to hearing their words, and they see them in colors, and there's a 1%, it's a very small percentage of people that have this, and there's a very 1% of the people that have synesthesia actually respond in a totally different way, and that's what I needed for the book Lycatchers. And my main lead character, Calamity Jane Randall, doesn't realize that she has synesthesia because it's something that she's had all of her life. And it screwed up so many relationships, from her parents' relationship when she called her father on lying about an affair when she was a child, that she's just repressed this all. And it takes, you know, so there's ways then of taking that synesthesia, okay, what's that? And then expanding it to make it the heart of your characters. Do you guys do the same sort of thing with notebooks or collections?
Go ahead, Laura.
Yeah, absolutely. I have my, I don't do, I do it digitally now, Paul. So, but I used to have notebooks, but I found that I can't keep track of them. So I've got my file of just really unique things that at some point I'm going to include in a mystery. And some I get from the news. I am an avid newspaper reader, so I'll pull things from headlines and stories, and other things just from real life. For example, I had a friend who sadly has passed away, but she was diagnosed with cancer, and she sent me an email once, and she said she had like blood cancer, leukemia, and she was having bone marrow transplant. And she said, "Did you know that once the bone marrow transplant happens, I will literally make the same blood as my donor?" And so my doctor told me, "Hey, if you're going to commit a crime, you can leave some blood, but don't leave your fingernails, but you could leave some blood because the other person will get arrested." And that's one of those things I just throw in that folder. And at some point, you know, I think, am I going to get back to that and somehow write a mystery? And now I've blown the whole secret. But anyway, I don't know. It would be cool. Interesting. I love taking both news stories, things that just from real life, things I notice, and putting them in a little a file, and I've come back to it many times. Yeah.
Now, Rebecca, my wife, when we're out somewhere, she will recognize that I have dived down a rabbit hole because all of a sudden I'm not present. Something has occurred that I've seen or heard, and all of a sudden my creative mind is running away with that, and I'm following that story. So my wife accuses me of spending 51% of my time in a fantasy world, and she's probably right. But do you find that when you are out and about and all of a sudden you just get hit by this bolt and it just consumes you at that point?
Yeah, you know, it usually happens when I'm eavesdropping on people. I mean, because I take my work for 20 years, I've gone to the same coffee shop. They let me buy 1 cup of tea, and I sit there and use their electricity for like 6 hours. And I love it because a lot of people have to write in silence, but I kind of need the input of sound and movement and things like that. And so in a coffee shop setting, used to be, you would hear snippets of conversation, and you can't help but think, wow, that's an unusual thing they're talking about, or let me look that up. And the nice thing is my family has lived with me so long that they're just fine if I disappear. You know, I could disappear from the dinner table and just a minute, I want to go look this up, and I do. And it's very hard to describe to people who don't have this kind of thing happen to them. But boy, it feels wonderful. It's like suddenly you're just reborn in that instant. And for that moment, it's very exciting, and it's very thrilling to have your brain sort of on steroids. So absolutely. I think, I'll bet I probably am a little more frenetic about it than you are. I have a funny feeling you zone out on your wife. I tend to grab people by the shoulders and go, guess what? So each of us, that's the neat thing about writing. We're all so different, and yet we're all so much the same in how we create. So it's kind of cool.
What you said there about you liking to eavesdrop, I've always claimed that one of the greatest human needs is to be able to hear what's going on the table behind you.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely.
And
you know, Paul,
go ahead.
I was just going to say, I think I have missed that so much these last, 5 months. I have missed eavesdropping and in a nice way, but I am a people watcher, and that's been hard. And it's also affected maybe, you know, my ability to get as much, I don't know, I call it my homework when I'm writing. I like to just watch people, and it's my homework, and I've missed that, and I'm excited to get back and do that. I think it'll help my writing come quicker.
It's a stimulation. We all need stimulation as writers. and it comes to us differently. All right. So whether it's being with people or music or, any of those types of things, and we're not getting them anymore, which leads me to another question, which would be, how are you going to deal with the pandemic in your books in the future? How has this changed what you're going to write, or has it?
I'll jump in. You know what? Just the book I'm working on now, I mentioned it briefly, but frankly, I think it's going to be old news. So by the time I would get a new book out, if it organically comes into a story, it's great, but I don't think I'm gonna light anything on fire in my books regarding the pandemic. I think hopefully the actual story that I'm trying to tell will be more interesting than the characters trying to deal with somebody wearing a mask. So unless something is necessary to relate to it, for instance, poor Finn, cops are not held in good stead these days with all the BLM, things and the demonstrations. And so that to me seems organic, that a police guy might worry about going into an unusual building. But other than that, I don't think I intend to really address the pandemic.
I have to, because I write about interrogators. And of course, so much of what we do is watching facial expressions, and now everybody's got a mask on.
Yeah, that makes sense.
How do you adjust to that? And so I think that there's a little bit, it depends on how important the situation is to what the story that we're telling. Mm-hmm. I also write Westerns, and it has absolutely no effect on that whatsoever until I started thinking about what happened if a pandemic hit in the Old West.
Yep.
And how is that handled so differently? And there were certain plagues like that did go through. And again, that started my story juices flowing and going from there. How about you, Lois? What about the pandemic?
I think I'm going to use it more just fodder. I don't think I'm going to address it specifically. Like, I don't think it's going to show up in my book. But I'm with you in that, the way that a country has responded, different countries have responded, gives some pretty interesting plot ideas for like a future issue or future world event that might be exciting to write about. But I don't know if I'm going to address the 2020 pandemic necessarily.
And I think, what do readers pick up a book for? They pick up a book to escape. Yeah. And they don't want to be reading about what they're just seeing and worrying about on the nightly news. So I always say that my first job as a writer is to entertain you. My goal is to make you think, but that first job is to entertain. And I think you have to not address necessarily so harshly those news moments of the day, because that's what people are trying to get away from.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, nuance is everything. I mean, nuance in dialogue, nuance in, our readers are really smart people, and they don't want to be hit over the head with anything. We tell our story and we have our point of view, and they'll have their point of view, but I really have found readers are so intelligent. You don't need to pander in any way. And the trick to me is keeping one step ahead of them, so they're at least surprised at the end, but sometimes can't do that. They really are very good.
It seems to me that audiences for our books are changing. You used to be able to say that 85% of people who read mysteries were women, right? 95% of readers of Westerns would be men. I don't think that holds true anymore, and I don't think it holds true in other genres like YA, young adult. Is it only young adult readers that read young adult? No, it's a lot of adults read young adult. So do you feel your audiences are changing? When it comes to your actual readers, do you think it's balancing out, or do you still think your readers are one way or the other? Who do you hear from? Do you hear from young readers? Do you hear from male readers, female readers? Has your audience changed noticeably?
Do you want to go, Rebecca? Or?
Either way, go ahead.
Go ahead, Lois.
I'll be brief on this one. Audience has always been a struggle for me. When I started writing, I assumed I was like other women readers. So I wrote books that I would enjoy. I have since learned that perhaps I'm not an average woman reader, because most of the people who would connect with me were men. But that said, I really did want to, include women in my audience. So I've tried to put some romance elements in there. So I don't know if my audience has been changing, but I certainly have been trying to understand my audience better. And I think that is the trick of a writer. And maybe that is, Paul, maybe that is the problem, is that those audiences are kind of changing and going back and forth. And men are, I've got to be honest, men kind of like romance. I'm not going to lie.
Yeah.
I don't know. And that surprised me. So I don't know.
Go ahead, Rebecca. How about you? How do you feel about your audience?
My audience has changed slightly. I'm getting a lot more male readers and really engaged male readers, which surprises me that they reach out a lot to talk about the books. And I think that's super cool. So I'm still about 75-25, 75 women, 25 men. And the women readers, I don't think they've changed. I think a lot of them simply have moved on to more dedicated thriller mystery. They probably came from romantic suspense. So I agree with Lois. The men do like, and I call it more relationship as opposed to romance. Yeah. They do like a well drawn out relationship. So do the women. So I seem to have been able to find that middle of the road where it's not very romancy, but there are definite solid relationships. And I agree, Lois, that the men have been incredibly responsive to having the relationship aspect within the books. So yeah, the male audience is always growing, and it's very cool. In fact, I have more male readers overseas than I actually do here. So like UK has a larger male readership. It's very interesting. I love watching the statistics move around, but they are still old. I mean, I'm not getting 22-year-olds. I'm getting 35 to 60 is my spot.
Interesting. They did make, sorry, Paul, one other thing. I did notice that when the podcast, so I started writing about myth and legends and things like that, starting as back as 2009 in some of my young adult books. And I don't know if that really grabbed the attention of my young adult readers. Now, my Legends of Treasure series is an adult book, but I did do a little bit, I did kind of dabble in some young adult books in the beginning. And what's interesting, though, is that ever since the Lore podcast came out, all of a sudden, young adults are more interested in mythology and legends. Yeah. So, modern, I think what changes an audience, too, can also be what's hip. And if something like that gets to be popular, young adults can all of a sudden go from not caring about, history, myth, legends to thinking it's cool to learn. So interesting how it can just go back and forth, and it's the nebulous audience that we just want to be sure we're attracting, and sometimes they do morph.
And what, that's a good point about the podcast. I think the same thing has reflected in my work, in that podcasts like Case File and the Murderino Ladies and all that stuff has really kind of jump-started, interest in the crime genre for women, especially. The Murderino Ladies crack me up, and there are a lot of women who are hosting these podcasts. So it just kind of falls over a little bit. That I hadn't really thought about that, but I think you're absolutely right.
And I think that there's something to be said for changing social attitudes. I think at one time men would not read a book with a female lead protagonist. I don't think that prejudice exists anymore. Actually, what they want to read is a good book in the genre that they like to read. In fact, with our macho guys over at Wolfpack Publishing, I sold Lois to them by telling them it was, Laura Croft meets history mysteries. And he went, really? Cool.
Oh, right? Great log line.
But having said that, I think we also have to understand as publishers that you've got to do different things to appeal to different audiences.
Sure.
One type of promotion does not work in all situations. So if you do want to bring in a specific audience, you have to find what it is that's going to reach them. But I don't think those inherent prejudices are there anymore.
Well,
Or certainly not as much as they used to be.
yeah, early on, my publisher made me use initials when I was doing the legal fiction so that people would not know if I was a man or a woman. And, you know, that was a long time ago. And I had no problem with it. I thought my purpose was to sell books. But when I look back, I think, how funny is that and how far we've come, that I don't need to worry about, you know, am I a man or a woman, as long as the tale is told well.
Yeah.
And I think that's very true. And I think it's one of the things that we're missing today is we've got a long way to go as a society. Granted, there's a lot of things that need to be changed, but we've also got to celebrate how far we've come. So much has changed, and hopefully will continue to change. But ignoring the fact that we've made progress, I think is wrong. Right?
Oh,
so
absolutely.
You no longer have to hide behind a set of initials. That's a wonderful step forward in progress. But now we're running into cultural appropriation. Right? So how dare you, Rebecca, culturally appropriate the lawyer's background, right? Because how can you possibly know anything about that? How dare I write a book in first person from a women's perspective? Whether it be race or gender. I don't know if this is a tempest in a teacup, but right now I have a young adult author who's written just an absolutely terrific book with a Chinese American female lead character. And she's been turned down by so many publishers because she's not Chinese.
I believe it.
It just makes no sense to me. How good is the book? Well, the book is great. We love the book, but we're worried about what the perception is going to be. And I'm ready for that to be over with.
But you know, oh, sorry, go ahead, Lois.
No, Rebecca, I'll go second. Go for it.
Oh, I mean, just a thought, you know, from a business standpoint, I kind of understand a traditional publisher having these concerns. Having left traditional publishing many years ago, done independent now with Wolfpack, I think we're more mavericky, and we don't have that overhead they have to worry about. You know, we don't have the offices, we don't have the sales forces and all that. So I think, I don't know, or maybe it's just my age that I've been doing it a long time, and hopefully, you know, we face that future a little differently than this poor author. And I just think it breaks my heart. I wish, you know, there was a little bit more spine with the publishers, but I do understand their concerns.
Well, Nova's not this poor author, because she's going to be the lead author for Wolfpack's new young adult imprint, Wise.
I knew you would take care of her.
I read that book and I went, why is nobody publishing? This is a fantastic book.
Yeah.
That said, you're talking about the changes in the publishing paradigm with Wolfpack. Nova knows a lot about the YA side of things.
Mm-hmm.
And we've had to work together to figure out how Wolfpack's publishing paradigm can incorporate some of that without losing what we do that we know works to sell books and get readers. So this is an ongoing process, and part of that is what excites me about this business. Is it is changing, and legacy or traditional publishing is still fighting the old battle, whereas Wolfpack and some other companies are surging ahead. And you know, we like to think we're ahead of the pack, and we are in many respects. But Wolfpack, again, you talked about going independent, right? So we go from traditional publishing to independent publishing, and there, because all three of us have been there, we're doing all of our own promotion and all of that other stuff, and you're going, I don't want to do this. What I want to do is write books. I think, you know, there were boutique publishers that they would publish your book, but what did they do with it? Not much more than you would do if you published it yourself. And I think Wolfpack has found a way to not just sell books, but to get books into the hands of loyal readers who will read from cover to cover and want the next book right away. And that excites me. And I you know, I'm hoping that's what excites you guys too about coming to Wolfpack, is this new way of doing things and staying.
I think we can agree on that, right? Right, Lois?
Absolutely.
I am excited because I am not an algorithm watching person. And even if I watched it, I don't know what I would do with it. So I am really excited to see how this works, because it's the first time I've listened to something and said, ah, that makes sense. So yeah, I'm excited.
You know, Paul, I felt like as an independent author, I felt like now I have no problem like writing, like PR releases, having social media accounts, things like that. But there were aspects to selling a book independently that it was sucking the life out of my writing. And so when my agent kind of told me about Wolfpack, I thought that is the best of both worlds, you know, because you're right. You do deal with niche books that traditional publishers may not look at. But there's an audience out there. You've proven it. You've proven it again and again. There are audiences for all sorts of types of books. And it is kind of nice because Wolfpack doesn't have to play in the same political arena as some of the larger, more traditional publishers. And, you know, just kudos to you and to Wolfpack. Ever since I put on my Facebook page that I was picked up by Wolfpack, I have been really surprised, because I kind of thought, okay, Wolfpack, it's small. It's not like saying I got published by, a big name, you know. I've had so many authors on my social media pages respond and say, I love Wolfpack. I read their stuff. I've heard of Wolfpack. This is exciting. And that's cool. I think that says a lot too, that the authors are reading the books that you're publishing.
And what excites me as a writer and as, you know, Wolfpack representative is this is truly a writer publisher partnership. I always maintain that the big 5 legacy publishers in New York, they would love to be able to publish books without having to deal with authors.
Oh yeah.
We're basically an irritant. But here, an author can look to Wolfpack for a lot of things, you know, as far as taking over those social media things, using our marketing background, using everything that we have going, watching the algorithms and adjusting on a daily basis, and working with covers, and, you know, what works as a cover, what works as a thumbnail. We do a tremendous amount of research on that. But then we turn to you as the authors and say, we know you have a platform already established. What can we do to support that platform? And so we're coming at this from 2 fronts, and I find that incredibly energizing.
Well, I need to throw in 2 cents, because I'm brand new here. I haven't even announced yet, because I'm waiting to see when the appropriate time was. But the most amazing thing happened as soon as we hooked up, which was you actually you actually respond to my calls.
That is not what we do at Wolfpack. We do not hook up. I want you to know.
I was just going to say.
Sorry.
It isn't how I got you to sign.
Words. Oh, let me get my thesaurus. But you know, after 25 years with the big 5, you got a phone call or you got contacts and information when your book was on the bestseller list. If your next one didn't hit the bestseller list, you know, and was more modest, suddenly you didn't exist. So this camaraderie that I see on your boards, and that I have experienced through, you know, our discussions, truly, and I think Lois will agree, is very unique. This just does not happen in normal publishing. So kudos to you guys.
Thank you. And there isn't a lot of competitive edge. Our authors it doesn't seem to me like they feel like they're competing with each other.
Yeah.
I mean, there really is this camaraderie that you talk about of support, and our writers are, you know, very strong supporters, both on our lists and working together, but, you know, in pushing each other's books on our social medias.
Yeah.
I think that you don't see that in traditional publishing anywhere.
Oh no, traditional publishing only has a certain number of slots. And so if you're competing for 10 slots on the list that month, only 10 people are going to get it. You know, with what we do, you know, independent or like with Wolfpack, we can be part of a team, which is so exciting because we're not competing for just you know, that slot. We're saying, hey, you've got readers and we've got all sorts of stuff, and they love it, and they don't have to wait till it comes out in a bookstore. I love this. The authors I've met so far are amazing, amazingly supportive.
Thank you. And I think that one of the keys as acquisitions editor, one of the key things, if not the key thing, that I look at with an author is not how well they write, not how big a platform they have, but are they going to be a pain in the butt to deal with? Seriously, right? So the decisions that I've made with most of the authors that way is why we get along so well, right? And everybody is cooperative. I mean, yeah, if you call and you want to know about this or about that, everybody is fine with it. You can call and ask anything, and everybody responds, but it's not one person that is demanding things be done, right?
Lois, you're going to put that on your resume? You're going to put, I am not a pain in the butt on the resume?
I have been told by some I'm not a pain in the butt. Others?
Oh my God.
So, Rebecca,
Yeah.
tell me the one book that you read that changed your life.
Oh man. Okay, I will tell you. Wilkie Collins' Woman in White, written in, I think, 1870s. It is considered the first legal thriller. I have read that book probably 3 or 4 times, and the characters were fantastic. The author had a sense of humor, and it reminded me to not keep the angst level too high all the time. I loved that there was this time where he let the reader rest. But what I really loved was at a time he took a legal premise in England and sort of turned it on its head. It was that women could not inherit property. And he wove such an amazing story about it. And I thought, that's what I want to do. I want to take something small that will absolutely devastate a normal human being if the law comes after them. You know, this tiny little thing that can ruin a life of an individual against this huge system. And I really loved Woman in White. It's one of my favorite books.
That's an unusual choice. I've not heard that one before. Lois, same question. What book changed your life?
So this is what came to mind. I was one of those nerdy children who worked hard doing my chores, would earn 50 cents for doing things, save that, and I spent all my money on the Scholastic book orders in elementary school.
All right.
And that was my excitement. I mean, when the teacher handed out those Scholastic book orders, it was like Christmas, and I would take it home. So honestly, some of the books that changed my lives, you would not know the name, you would not know the author, but I can tell you the plot line backwards and forwards because I read them and reread them. So for example, I really liked the Gary Polson kinds of books. It wasn't necessarily Gary Polson, but I loved those survivalist books when I was a child. And I also loved dystopian fiction. And I remember reading one book where they were looking for a forever stay young formula. And I must have read that one, 30 times. But what I have found so interesting is that as an adult, I'm writing and I'll finish a book, and then I'll kind of sit back and think, oh, I wonder where I got that inspiration. And then all of a sudden I'll be like, oh my gosh, like this one little plot point is just like that kind of cheesy, stupid Scholastic book that I read when I was like 8 years old. I think reading as a child just planted in my mind just a love for like plot twists and definitely fantasy angle. I've always enjoyed that. But and I can see those scattered throughout my books, even if they're for adults and it's not like the cheesy, I hope it's not the cheesy like kid plot, but I can see them pop up. And so definitely reading as a child influenced me a ton.
You know, it's interesting with the dystopian books, we don't need to read them anymore because we're living in them right now. But
Amen.
But it's interesting to have a wider view of that genre and see how close some of the authors came. You know, you can see the patterns, the predictability of of their storylines, and you're just going, how
They
prescient
were
was this?
brilliant.
Orson
Brilliant.
Scott Card in his book Ender's Game,
Yes.
like perfectly describes an iPad. It's
Yeah.
crazy. It is crazy. Like I'm reading that and I'm like, wow, you're right. We're living kind of the dystopian stuff that I used to read.
Or just Star Trek when they had communicators. I love the communicators. I thought that's so cool. And now we all carry our phones. It's just amazing. But, you know, I read something the other day that said 1984, the problem today is people are taking 1984 as a playbook and not a cautionary tale. And I thought, wow, that is really smart. Yeah, I think you're right.
Thank you for mentioning Ender's Game. That is the book that I always give to somebody who says, I don't like to read. Okay, here's Ender's Game. And it's never once failed for them to come back and go, did this guy write anything else?
That's good to know.
Yeah, it's a fast, very well-written book.
Agreed.
So with that, well-written books, Lois, what is the one book you want to write? Do you have a book in the future or something that's different that you just haven't gotten around to yet?
So the Legends of Treasure series, I would say, is a micro book in the sense that it takes, it's a small town. It always begins in a small town. Sometimes in fact, often they leave the small town. But I have always wanted to write an epic book, something that is like, you know, the whole world is going to blow up if this problem is not solved. So we're talking like a Lord of the Rings and stuff. That is a book I would love to write. But anyway, there's pros and cons to both, but yeah, I'd love to write some big epic tale.
And I think that there's a time for that, and it may not be right now.
Exactly.
I have to write the best book that I can write right now.
Yeah.
And that may not be, each book we learn something, and each book we grow from, and eventually you hope to get to the point where you write that epic. You know? And Rebecca, what about you? What's your one big book that you would?
Well, I don't think I have one big book. I'm going to go back to your file of ideas. Well, I just love all my characters, and I have a number of standalone novels, and I would love to make each of those main characters have their own series because they never quite leave me. But that would mean probably I'd have to live to 140 if I was lucky. So yeah, I know it's really hard, but there's one especially I would like to go back to so much, and it does have a little bit of an overlying fantasy element. Before Her Eyes is the book, and that one I like. It's a small town sheriff with sort of a sixth sense, but the challenge of all these books is for the reader to figure out if it's real or not real, and it's always real. So they take a lot of precision writing about where the clues come and how I can explain the reality of them because they're not really fantasy books. So I would love to revisit a lot of those heroes and heroines and say, look, you've got, 3 more books in me. Yay. That would be my dream. I'd love to do that.
And one last question, Rebecca, are your characters real to you? Do they live in your head?
Oh my gosh, absolutely. When I'm writing, when I'm in the zone, these people, I literally, if I got up from my desk and walked down the street and saw them, I would know them. I think that's when I switched from becoming a person who writes to a writer, is when I started feeling them so deeply that I knew exactly what the reactions would be, exactly what hurts them, what elevates them. I love my characters, but the thing is, I love my villains just as much as I love my heroes because I make sure they always have a motivation. So if I can empathize with that motivation, then I can be so sad about their downfall because it could have changed. But I love all the characters the same, villain and hero. I think they have to be equally as dramatic. And so, yeah, I love them. I hope other people do too.
And Lois, just slightly differently, do your characters tell you in your head when you're taking them down a wrong path and you got to back up and go in a different direction?
Yes. They do. For example, so the protagonist in my book has a counterpart, a guy. And in one of my series, at least for me anyway, I like them because the woman's the one with the gun and he doesn't do guns. And in one book, I started to take him down the path of he was going to like go and get his gun and kind of show her he was, you know, and I had to step back from that because he told me, no, that's what I like about me. This is what makes me me. So anyway, they do. They tell me when I'm taking them places they don't want to go.
And that's what makes us very strange.
Yes.
Thank you all for being with me today. Appreciate your time, and I am looking forward to reading all of your new books because I've already read all of the ones you've already put out.
Oh my gosh.
Thank you guys, and we will talk again soon.
Thank you, Paul.
Bye, Paul.